Hi, and welcome to Labor Online, a kind of podcast about a new essay that's coming out in the current issue of Labor. I'm here with Tina Wei, who wrote the essay, um, and it's all about Amazon's Mechanical Turk and sort of a dynamic of power struggles with workers, between workers and scientists and others who want to exploit their labor. And we are really delighted. I actually was choosing this article because I thought it was really fascinating and current because Tina Wei takes a very interesting approach of different categories of exploration that uses labor history and uses production of knowledge and uses scientists as labor. A few issues ago, we did a whole podcast about the role of labor in science. So this adds to that conversation. So Tina, would you explain to a general audience what Amazon's Mechanical Turk is and why uh, you think it's an important thing for people to be aware of. And for people who don't know what it is, just explain it basically.
Yeah, so Amazon Mechanical Turk is a crowdsourcing labor platform that was created by Amazon, the company, originally the online bookseller. And initially, it was created to help them identify duplicate web pages internally within the company. And then as they rolled out this feature within the company, they found that it was actually very useful. And so they decided to open it to the public starting in 2005 so that other people could use their labor platform and then they could charge a site usage fee in hosting the platform so that they can benefit doubly internally and also as an external kind of platform. And the name of the platform, Mechanical Turk, is referencing the automaton or an invention that was purportedly an automaton that was a chess playing machine, and it was called the Mechanical Turk. Turk referring to Turkish. It was referencing these kind of Orientalist concerns about the docile kind of Muslim body, and it was a machine that was toured around the world, supposedly defeating people in chess as this automaton. But it turns out that within, I guess, the belly of the beast, or concealed within the inside of the machine, was a human that was moving the chess pieces. And so is actually kind of a hoax that had been touted around as an early robot, essentially. And so Amazon, in naming its labor platform after this historical hoax, is trying to draw attention in a kind of cheeky way to the fact that they're doing something sneaky here. And part of the function of the platform is that they allow companies sometimes that purportedly say they're offering AI services to hire humans on the internet to do the work for very cheap. And so, because it's real, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's right. So the hoax originally was that people thought it was a robot, but inside there was a human being manipulating it all. But
Right.
actually, this kind of turns it upside down, right? That Amazon is saying we're fooling you into thinking that it is AI.
Yeah. So a lot of companies, and I guess originally maybe Amazon too, but a lot of companies will, for example, sell a service that's a transcription service, and they will charge you however many dollars per minute of audio to transcribe using AI. But it's really costly and challenging to develop really high quality technologies. And so a lot of these companies found that it's actually just cheaper to hire someone online to check their work before they send it back to the clients, even if they have to shoulder that cost kind of like as a hidden cost.
Mhm.
It's still cheaper to do that and hide the human labor than to develop a real technology that actually accomplishes what they claim they can accomplish.
Okay. So tell us about the workers in that world of the Mechanical Turk? Because it's really not mechanical, right? And go ahead.
So the way I see it, and the way a lot of people see it when they write about this labor platform is that it's part in way of the gig economy or the online gig economy. So in the way that various other tasks can be outsourced to TaskRabbit or Uber, this is a way to outsource certain online digital tasks to someone who's on the internet, but whom you don't have to hire on as an employee for the company to do those tasks. So some of them can be kind of like to type up something, to do little bits of research, but other types of tasks, anything that can be accomplished online from a computer can be outsourced in these ways. But the way in which I read it back into the history of de-skilling is that instead of cutting things down to the size of a project or a contract or smaller size work, this is cutting things down to the point where they call it's kind of micro task, the way they call it on the platform. And so people are paid sometimes $1 or a few dollars to do a task. And so the size of the labor that's contracted out becomes so micro and shrunken down that people need to acquire many, many, many thousands of tasks in order to just make any sizable paycheck. And they're constantly on the site browsing for the next task. Because as a contractor, you're constantly only making money so long as you bring in more contracts. But in this case, when it's kind of micro contracting, as some scholars call it, you have to the rate at which this turnover happens and you have to constantly acquire new tasks creates all sorts of like psychological and sometimes physical consequences for the workers because you're just like on the computer constantly.
And what really struck me when I was reading your article is that they acquire this kind of massive amount of skills in the process of learning how to get a contract, right? So they are really kind of skilled labor, but they're
Yeah.
doing things that are defined as unskilled. And really, the other thing that you get into is dehumanizing. Can you just
Mhm.
elaborate a little bit on that
Yeah.
dehumanizing element of?
Yeah, your observation about the skilled, unskilled aspect is also really striking in this type of gig work and also just other gig work in general, because on other platforms too, like Uber or other platforms, drivers will share with each other information about how do you get the best rides, where can you make the most money, and this type of information sharing happens sometimes on the Amazon Mechanical Turk community in terms of all the online forums that have cropped up around this platform because they're not communicating to each other on the platform, but kind of outside of it, sometimes in forums that they built for themselves. And so, yeah, the platform treats them as unskilled labor because they're doing something that supposedly requires no training. They're just checking for any kind of human cognition, like basic human cognition of pattern recognition, language processing, catching any innuendos. Some are content moderators. And so it's like you're checking for, is this a violent photo and things like that.
So that, I mean, I guess people might be confused, like what exactly are those micro tasks? Could you just elaborate a few more things that they're doing here?
Yeah, so some of them, in terms of examples that also some people argue have been dehumanizing for them, are they'll when you go on social media and someone reports this post violates the community guidelines. Sometimes those go to a person who has to review these reports of abusive content. And the part of it where it's using human cognition is that while an AI system might have trouble being able to tell the difference between hate speech or something else, or a violent image and something else, humans can tell pretty clearly and so it's in some cases, and so a lot of these other content platforms,
Sorry, you cut out there. You cut out there for just a minute. Could you say whatever you were saying?
yeah, so a lot of people on Mechanical Turk and also on other platforms when they do content moderation, they talk about the psychological toll of having to see so many disturbing images of ISIS beheadings, child pornography, just really the disturbing stuff that gets reported online, that they then have to review as part of the process of taking down the abusive content. And it's just an enormous psychological toll to be seeing that type of image from, I guess, like people call the internet the ugly, like underbelly of humanity, and the people who have to review that content as part of their job. A lot of people come away with really horrible experiences and a huge psychological toll.
So in order to make money, you have to go through a lot of this exhausting, dehumanizing, and speed up. It's a constant speed up. They have to, and they're speeding themselves up. It just as you know, in the old, and you mentioned scientific management, and all of the perils that it brought, and putting this into that longer term context. I want to get into that just briefly, but also ask you about first, workers are not happy with this, right? Why haven't they been able to do anything about it? Or what have they done, and how successful or not have they been?
Yeah, so I guess they have tried to do things about it. One of the projects that was part of these efforts that a lot of scholars write about is called the Turk Opticon, which is a reference to the Panopticon. And so the way that it happens on the Mechanical Turk website is that there's a one directional evaluation or like review process. So the people who are submitting tasks, the people hiring people on the platform can review, did you do a good job? And you have to maintain a certain percentage, just like an Uber driver. You have to maintain a certain percentage, or else people won't go to you for the next task. And so this places a huge burden on the workers to do whatever's asked of them, because if their percentage drops, then they will be automatically disqualified from getting certain types of future work on the platform. And so what this Turk Opticon platform tried to do is to reverse, to make this kind of screening process symmetrical in a way. So they created a site where they could rate the people posting tasks on the platform. So you can say this person's a scammer, or they never paid me, or they kind of arbitrarily kept me from a certain percentage of my earnings, or whatever the case is. And so they can rate this person in return so that the workers can protect themselves. Just as they're being evaluated, they can evaluate the people posting tasks.
And to be clear, this is a large number of people who go to Amazon. It's not Amazon, this behemoth, right? Who it's people who are subcontracting through Amazon for these workers. So it's a large body, or a number of people. You would think that they maybe had some power in relationship to those people who are contracting. So can you talk a little bit about who those people are who are contracting? You bring in the history of science here, and the scientists themselves in part of your article, in a quite fascinating way. So go ahead with that. So,
Um, yeah, so as we were talking about earlier, initially most of the clients were other technology companies trying to use the service to power their AI or other technologies they're trying to market, but an unexpected population that also discovered the platform were academics trying to do survey research. And so a lot of academics who do survey research, mostly in psychology, behavioral science, fields like that, there may be survey research related to the study. And previously, a lot of these studies had moved into the laboratory,
mhm.
and those studies had been critiqued for using a selective subset of the human race, essentially, to generalize their science to talk about human behavior. And so the acronym that was used for that critique is called WEIRD. It's the critique is that when you only do laboratory psychology studies on undergraduate college students in America or North America, most of these people are Western, educated, industrialized. I think the R is rational, and then D is democratic for the acronym WEIRD. And so the field had been critiqued already for using a small subset, too small subset of a population to generalize their findings. And then some of them discovered that, oh, I can run my studies on this online platform. And in doing so, pay them a couple of dollars per person. And then you can use the shrinking research budgets to power a very large sample size for the research. So the thinking goes. And in the beginning, it seemed like it solved a problem for them because if the critique is that all of their research subjects are wealthy 18-year-olds who are predominantly white, then by going onto this online platform, which in the beginning seemed more diverse than American undergraduates in the sense that people were of a wide age range. There seemed to be a high representation of minorities on the platform. A lot of people seem to be low income and so on and so forth. They thought, oh, this solves our problem that we were receiving critique for. And now we just found this comparatively diverse online database to power our studies for a very low cost. And so it seemed like a win-win.
So what kind of studies are these, though? What kind of
Um, a lot of them deal with
scientists?
like human cognition. And so they'll ask questions about there'll be usually various types of like deception-based prompts, testing your reaction to certain things. Both in terms of speed, sometimes bias, sometimes like what is the rational process by which you engage in something. Um, Now, the majority of those studies are happening on Mechanical Turk. So anytime you read a news article about, oh, so and so found something, a lot of the times those studies were run on Mechanical Turk because that's become kind of like the discipline baseline. And if everybody is going on there and able to achieve, run a study essentially in 48 hours online and get 1,000 participants, if you don't keep up with it, then you can't keep up with certain publication pressures in the field.
And that's what you bring in too, that, both of these are precarious sort of academic and gig environments, right? That both of these are driving responses from the other. Can you talk about that? And you really bring in some ethical issues that are stunning to me, at least. You know, that question the validity of a lot of these studies.
So, within the US, the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, is the organization that governs the ethics of these studies, and studies involving human subjects have to pre-submit their proposal to receive approval in order to conduct the study. And part of the ethical quandary that emerges on this platform is that, first of all, it was not designed for studies to conduct studies, and they were the academics flocking to the platform, they were using it for an unintended purpose. Secondly, because of the economics of the platform, some IRBs started compromising on their existing guidelines. So some IRBs had minimum per hour payment requirements. And if certain academics were using Mechanical Turk for their research, the IRB would waive that minimum requirement because the argument was if you're pricing the task too high for the platform, then you will attract all the scammers and that will damage the quality of your research
Mm.
findings. And then so they're using the economics of the platform to then argue for a lowering of the rate of what they deem to be the baseline acceptable rate for research in terms
Can you
of
give some
compensation.
numbers? Some
I think it was $15 per hour.
mm.
And then they waived the $15 per hour minimum to be whatever the prevailing wage is on the platform, allegedly. When certain journalists try to do work on the platform for a news article. Some of them reported they were making like $2 an hour or $7 an hour, way below, well below minimum wage. Um, Other large scale studies found that the earnings could vary between $2 and $15 an hour if you're collecting multiple tasks and just doing them one after another, and to calculate an average per hour wage.
So, one of the reasons for this interview is just to encourage people to download this article, which is free. And so we don't need to go into everything. But I would just like to ask, what do you think is the most significant part of your findings in this article that people should be alert for, why they might want to use it for class or labor education class? Um, so go ahead.
Yeah. One of the things that most interested me about this project is what happens when you bring together labor history and the history of science, and how using the tools of labor history can shed light with implications for science. So, one of the arguments I make in the piece is that by using this crowdsourcing labor platform not for its intended purpose, academics started producing research that they're not fraudulent, but they're kind of questionable in some of their outcomes. Because within social science research in particular, people were not meant to be repeat buyers in a sense, or repeat participants in research, because some of the research is testing deceptive prompts, that if you memorize the answer to the deception prompts, then that defeated the purpose of the test that was supposed to be testing whether or not you're paying attention to the survey. And so they were bringing their research onto a platform where people depended on this for their income. And so the people who are using this basically as full-time research participants, they're just constantly participating in research. It corrupts the findings, because you're just not supposed. And one of the examples I give in the article is we've all become desensitized in a similar way, just in the online e-commerce platform, when they use these behavioral nudges to get us to buy something. So if you're purchasing a hotel, you'll see social proof is like 16 other people have this in their cart, or 16 other people viewed it today. Or they'll give you a scarcity message like 2 more left, act now, or whatever. And gradually, if you're overexposed to these behavioral nudges, people in the e-commerce case, and also in the research survey case, people become desensitized to it, and it corrupts various aspects of the research findings.
Then you also mentioned how scientists are throwing out some of their findings. That was the most stunning to me. Like, can you just briefly talk about that?
Yeah, because in so many ways it's treated as the Wild West. Even the IRB in some ways treats the platform as in a Wild West, because they're like, oh, we don't know what's happening with online research, so these research ethics guidelines are shifting as we as it develops. Some academics have taken the liberty to throw out quote unquote suspicious data, but it's a very fine line between whether something was actually suspicious, or maybe that was just an inconvenient data point that messed up
Mhm.
the finding they were trying to go for.
And the questions, right? I mean, when people are doing this in a repetitive way, they know how to game the question, or they grow weary of the question, right? So it becomes really that's a good term for it, Wild West situation. But it also shows that conflict, right? The labor conflict is at the heart of this, and that's what you do really brilliantly in the essay. So
Um,
go ahead.
If I can add one more comment on this, this actually came from one of the reviewers from Labor, where this person pointed out that it's such a trope within the history of underpaying labor, that when they go to the platform, they claim, oh, we're just paying the prevailing wage. Our wage is so low because that's what everybody's paying, so we have to match it. But then when they get when people start complaining about the labor conditions and when they get into these conflicts, then they say, oh, the labor was worthless anyways. Who would do work that's so cheap?
Right.
And so it's devalued, but they participated in devaluing the labor, but then they use it as an argument to say that's why it is worthless to begin with. And that's why they feel empowered to toss out the data because they treat it as something that is of a low value to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. That was is very interesting. And I mean the article always also, and we don't have enough time to get into this, it just really puts it into that historical context that makes it a very valuable piece. So thank you. But tell us a little bit about how this relates to the rest of your work. We haven't really talked about your biography or what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm a PhD candidate in the history of science at Harvard, and so I'm in a department that focuses entirely on the study of the history of science, technology, and medicine and understanding these developments in a historical context. Um, and my dissertation is on the history of fatigue in the workplace. And so the fatigue that the workers are experiencing on Amazon Mechanical Turk is in a way kind of like an epilogue to the things I'm studying in the dissertation in the
Mhm.
beginning of the 20th century. And so that's one of the reasons I became interested in it because of my interest in workplace fatigue in general and how science can be a tool to remedy that fatigue. And also, certain technological developments can spur that fatigue as well. So, this um, I guess, iterative, reflexive relationship between fatigue and science, technology, and medicine.
Mhm. Interesting. So we'll look forward to seeing that dissertation when it comes, when it's completed and in book form sometime. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope people will take a look at your free essay again on labor in the journal Labor. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
So I'll stop this recording.